Hey guys, tonight we're not going to conquer empires or uncover lost treasures. No, tonight, we're going to do something far more grounded. We're going to spend some quality time with a pair of very, very old sandals, and the people who were deeply spiritually concerned about keeping them in one piece. Think of it as an extreme historical ASMR episode, but with more dust and existential dread. You, as our plucky protagonist, are about to step into the sandals, quite literally, of a new arrival in the Egyptian desert of the 4th century. And trust me, your survival instincts, honed by modern comforts like padded insoles and overnight shipping, are about to get a reality check. You might not make it past the first week, but we're here for the vibes, not the survival guide. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment below telling me what city you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always quietly amazing to think of this little community of sleepy history lovers, scattered across different time zones, all drifting off to the same oddly specific stories. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing that hits you isn't the silence, or the solitude. It's the scale of the beige. You're standing at what feels like the edge of the world, where the fertile ribbon of the Nile Valley, a messy green life-choked strip, frays out into an endless rolling expanse of nothing. This is the Skeetes, the Nitrian Desert. The date, as best as we can pin it down, is somewhere around 330 or 340 AD. The Roman Empire is still a thing, but out here, it feels less like an empire and more like a rumor someone might have mentioned once, a lifetime ago. You left that rumor behind. You came here seeking God purity, a life stripped down to its barest essentials. That was the idea, anyway. Right now, the most essential thing in your universe is the angry raw stripe across the top of your right foot. You look down. Your footwear, a pair of sandalia you bought from a surly cobbler in the last village, is already staging a rebellion. The main strap, a strip of coarse leather that should loop comfortably over your instep, has decided to saw into your flesh with every step. The sole, made of layered leather scraps pegged together with tiny wooden nails, is already curling up at the toe like a dried leaf. You wiggle your toes, and a fine puff of dust, mingled with sand, sprinkles out. You haven't even reached the community of hermits you were told about, and your primary piece of mobile technology has failed. This, you think with a sinking feeling that has nothing to do with theology, is a problem. You hoist your small sack, containing a clay water bottle, a hunk of stale bread, a blanket, and maybe a copy of the Gospels if you were literate and wealthy, higher on your shoulder. The sun is a white, merciless coin in a pale blue sky, already beginning its slow baking descent. Shadows are starting to stretch long and distorted from the occasional rocky outcrop. You need shelter before nightfall. The temperature, you've been warned, doesn't politely cool down, it plunges. The desert day is an oven, the desert night is the inside of a cold clay jar. As you trudge forward, each step a tiny negotiation with the abrasive sand and the rebellious sandal, your mind drifts to why you're here. The mainstream historical point you've stumbled into is the birth of Christian monasticism. This era saw a massive social experiment, thousands of men, and later women, disillusioned with a newly official and to them worldly church, fled to the desert. They were the Abbas and Ammas, the desert fathers and mothers. Think of them as the original extreme minimalists, seeking a life of constant prayer and manual labor, far from the distractions of cities, families, and Roman bureaucracy. Anthony the Great is the celebrity hermit of the bunch, but out here, there are hundreds, eventually thousands, living alone or in loose communities called lavras. A cold, niche little fact settles in your mind as you scan for a place to rest. The very sand you're walking on in certain parts of the Skeetes is actually full of tiny, fossilized seashells. Millions of years ago, this was all part of the Tethys Ocean. Now it's a desert where people come to shed their past selves. The earth here is literally made of forgotten, crushed seas. It's the kind of detail that feels too poetic to be true, but geologists and archaeologists confirm it. You spot a shallow cave, or more accurately, a large overhang in a limestone cliff. It'll do. As you settle in, brushing away scorpions, a mental note you make with some urgency, you examine your sandal more closely. The point of failure is where the strap attaches to the sole. The stitching, probably done with sinew or palm fiber, has worn through. Historians and reenactors still debate fiercely about the exact construction methods of late Roman footwear found in dry climates like Egypt. Was the stitching purely functional, or was there a preferred, even holy way to do it that reflected the wearer's devotion? Some argue from surviving fragments that reinforced, almost over-engineered stitching was a point of pride. Others think they just used whatever was at hand. The academic papers on this are, I assure you, surprisingly heated. The sun dips below the horizon, and the blue bleeds into indigo, then a black studded with an impossible number of stars. The cold arrives on schedule, a physical presence that seeps through your tunic. You wrap yourself in your blanket, back against the cool rock, and stare at the impossible vastness above. The silence is so complete it has a weight, a texture. And all you can think about, buzzing in the quiet like a single persistent fly, is the throbbing on your foot, and the undeniable truth: tomorrow you will have to walk again. And the sandal will not have magically healed itself. You need a plan. You realize with a sigh that fogs in the chilly air, to ask for help. Dawn doesn't arrive with birdsong, but with a change in texture. The darkness fades from heavy velvet to grey burlap, and then, almost instantly, the world is washed in a pearlescent warmth-less glow. You extricate yourself from a state of half-stiffness, half-sleep, every joint protesting. The injured foot, after a night's rest, hasn't improved. If anything, it looks more swollen, more insistent in the morning light. You take a small sip of warm leather-tasting water, chew a piece of brick-hard bread, and your gaze falls again on the culprit. The sandals lie askew on the sand, looking both innocent and hateful. Asking for help. The thought, an anxiety last night, becomes this morning's clear action plan. You pack your meager belongings, pad the abrasive strap with cloth as best you can, and set off, limping further inland. The community of hermit cells, scattered like a honeycomb on the hillside, is said to be half a day's walk further. You walk, the gravel underfoot still friendly in the morning cool, but with each step you feel the tier widening, that wooden peg loosening. It makes your perception of distance painfully acute. Every 100 steps feels like an expedition. Just as you think you might be hallucinating a mirage, you see the first sign, a crude cairn, a simple cross scratched onto a flat, upright stone. This is not a grave, you'll later learn, it's a waymarker. Then you smell something, not the clean emptiness of the desert, but a mix of burning dry grass, dust, and an indefinable scent, something like old wool and plain humanity. Then you hear a sound. Not voices, but a regular steady thudding, thump, thump, thump. You round a wind-scoured rock face, and the view opens before you. It doesn't look like a village, more like a forgotten construction site. Dozens of caves are dug into the hillside, some with crude stone lintels, others just dark holes in the rock. Under a few struggling palm trees, low reed huts are scattered. People, or human-shaped beings, move slowly. Most wear undyed, almost dun-colored rough wool robes, hair and beards wild but not unclean, just unadorned. They are busy in their own worlds. One pounds something in a stone mortar with a heavy pestle, making that thumping sound. Another weaves a reed wall. Further off, someone stands motionless, facing east, arms slightly outstretched like a deeply rooted dead tree. These are they. You are seeing with your own eyes the Desert Fathers movement that mainstream history textbooks often gloss over, but which profoundly reshaped the spiritual landscape of the West. They are not a unified order, with no common rule, until later figures like Pachomius begin trying to establish communal rules. They are individualists, gathered in the same geographical battlefield for a common goal, to be alone with God and to fight the inner demons, logismoi, the troubling thoughts. They fled, anachoresis, not only from Roman tax collectors and societal complexity, but from their own unruly inner worlds. Imagine taking the entire inner turmoil of the social media age and moving it to the ultimate showdown in a desert with no phone, just endless stars and internal echoes. You cautiously approach the pounding monk. He looks up and you see his face, gaunt, tanned like ancient leather, wrinkles deep as canyons, but the eyes are extraordinarily clear and calm. He doesn't speak, just looks a question. Pax vobiscum, you say awkwardly. My sandals, you point to your foot, feeling this opening line is incredibly stupid and specific in the context of seeking spiritual guidance. He puts down the pestle, walks over, and without ceremony, crouches to examine your foot and sandal. His fingers are rough as roots, but the touch is light. He looks at the broken spot, then up at your anxious face, and then very slowly nods. Leather is dead, his voice is hoarse, as if rarely used, but the thread stitching it died first. Common. He stands, walks back to his hut, and retrieves a small coil of dark sinewy-looking material and a thick needle. Temporary, he says, handing them to you. But you need to find Silent John. He's in the Western Valley, near the Salt Flats. He understands leather. He has correspondence. You take the sinew and needle, confused. Correspondence. The monk has already returned to his mortar, resuming his slow, rhythmic pounding. Just as you think the conversation is over, he says without looking up, about leather. About repair. About how to make a dead thing walk a bit longer. He pauses, as if pondering a profound theological question. Sometimes, asking a question requires waiting a season for an echo. Patience is also a kind of stitch. An obscure bit of knowledge surfaces in your mind. One of the monk's staple foods is a type of hardtack called paximacea. It's not soft bread but baked twice, hard enough to be a roof tile. Made in large batches and stored, it's softened with water or wine before eating. Archaeologists have found piles of these hardtack fragments at some desert monastery sites. They are not just food but a currency of time, turning fleeting harvest, grain, into a storable, tangible defense against future uncertainty. Eating it, you are chewing on a calm expectation of future scarcity. You thank him, find a shady spot to sit, and begin trying to repair your sandal with a needle that looks like a tiny harpoon and the tough sinew. The work is clumsy. You realize you need to learn not just how to pray, but first how to keep your most basic survival tools from falling apart. Historians still debate whether this advocacy of extreme simplicity and self-sufficiency was a lofty spiritual discipline or a kind of negative reaction to classical urban civilization and its craft specialization. Did they actively choose poverty, or were they simply unable to cope with complex society, thus aestheticizing this retreat? From the perspective of this disobedient needle and the knots you can't tie properly, you're temporarily leaning towards a variant of the latter. When you can't even keep your shoes on, discussing metaphysics is indeed a luxury. The sinew becomes more pliable in the sun. You struggle to thread it through the needle's eye, mimicking memories of a tailor, and begin pulling the torn leather together, stitching. Each stitch is crooked, but it does close the gap. It feels less like repair and more like performing rough surgery on this sandal. When you finally tie the last knot and bite off the excess sinew, you feel a small but real sense of accomplishment. The sandal will hold for a while longer. You remember the monk's words. Silent John. The Western Valley. Correspondence about leather. You stand up, stamp your foot. The new stitches rub but don't cut. You know your next destination. You're going to seek not just a craftsman, but the possible existence of an invisible network woven from trivial needs and practical wisdom in this vast silence. You head towards the Western Valley indicated by the monk, the temporarily repaired sandal making a faint, different creak. The terrain changes. Flat gravel gradually gives way to undulating gullies and dry riverbeds. The air grows drier, with a hint of saltiness, the sign of salt flats. Vegetation here is sparser, just some salt-tolerant shrubs clinging to the ground, gray and defeated. Silence is amplified. The wind finds channels here, emitting low moans through rock crevices, like sighs from invisible giants. Just as you think you might have taken a wrong turn, you see smoke, a straight, thin wisp rising from a larger stone dwelling. This dwelling is more orderly than the previous huts, with even a small, stone-walled, struggling vegetable patch containing wilted onions and beans. Approaching, you hear voices inside, low, steady conversation, interspersed with the soft rustle of papyrus being unfurled. You knock on the door made of rough planks. The voices stop. After a moment, the door is pulled open, and a figure appears. He appears slightly more orderly than the previous monk. His beard is roughly trimmed. His robe, though equally plain, has neat, dense stitching. He has a broad, gentle face, but his eyes carry a practical focus, like someone accustomed to managing affairs. This is Pachomius, though you don't know his name yet. He would later become a key figure in monastic history, not as a solitary hermit but as a pioneer trying to organize the anchorites, establishing monastic communities, koinonia, with shared rules, labor, and prayer. If Anthony is the celebrity of solitude, Pachomius is the project manager of communal life. Peace be with you, he says, tone calm but direct. You're new? Lost? His gaze habitually sweeps over you, pausing for a barely perceptible moment on your poorly patched sandal, as if saying, "Ah, another one." I'm looking for Silent John, about leather, you explain. Pachomius steps aside to let you in. John lives deeper in the canyon, only comes out for water once a week. You can wait for him at the spring, tomorrow perhaps. His dwelling's interior is more utilitarian than outside. Piles of papyrus scrolls and wooden tablets sit in a corner. A flat stone serving as a table holds a rough map, perhaps showing nearby water sources and monks' dwellings, and a few simple carpentry tools. Most notably, He wears a pair of sandals that look well maintained but also show signs of age. However, he is frowning slightly at these very sandals. I'm preparing an inquiry for John, Pachomius says, pointing to his sandal, specifically where the sole's forepart meets the upper. The leather there is severely worn, almost translucent, but the seam itself seems sturdy. My issue isn't breakage, but wear prevention. I've tried soaking with different oils, but the desert grit is like countless little knives. I've heard that far on the other side of Cetus, some brothers use a method of rubbing the leather edges with a mix of fig milk and fine sand. I don't know if this rumor is true, or how effective it is. You realize you are witnessing a historical moment, the initiation of a scholarly consultation based on practical need. This isn't a heated debate about the Trinity or Christ's divinity, but a technical discussion on how to make leather more durable. This is the origin point of that boring correspondence. Pachomius invites you to sit, offering a cup of water. He begins preparing writing materials. A mainstream historical point emerges here. Writing at this time was expensive and laborious. What paper would he use? Possibly papyrus, Egypt's traditional material made from pressed and glued pith of Nile Delta sedge, relatively accessible but fragile, or more durable parchment, which required complex tanning and was costly. For a monk advocating poverty, the choice of writing medium itself might be a small luxury to weigh. A very niche bit of knowledge, the ink used for writing, especially more permanent carbon ink, sometimes used fish glue, a gelatin from fish bladders, as a binder. Imagine a sacred doctrine or a letter about sandals, its script surviving millennia partly thanks to the bladder of some Nile fish. The chain of causality holds an almost absurd poetry. Pachomius finds a fairly uniform fragment of papyrus, not a whole roll, showing frugality, a small piece of dried charcoal, and a stone dish with a little water. He begins grinding the charcoal to make simple ink. His movements are slow and precise. To Brother Aga though, he murmurs to himself, composing the sentences, dwelling in the cave on the shaded side of Salt Mountain. First, greetings, wishing him peace in silence. Then mention the recent situation of our mutually known brother, Elijah, to show care. Finally, can inquire about the leather hardening method, need to describe the wear pattern, location, the type of oil I used, and the fig milk method I heard, asking for his experience and judgment. Watching him, you suddenly understand the weight of this letter. It's not just a request for help. It's a thread maintaining the fragile web of interpersonal and knowledge connections scattered across the vast desert. It contains social etiquette, greetings and care, information exchange, news of a mutual acquaintance, and only then the core technical inquiry. Sending such a letter means trusting a traveler, caravan, pilgrim, or another monk, who might pass by only once every few months. It means waiting for a reply that could take half a year or longer. It means entrusting a question to time and uncertainty. Historians still debate whether this inefficient, delayed communication hindered the accumulation of technical knowledge among desert monastic groups, or whether, precisely because communication was so difficult, every successful transfer of knowledge, whether spiritual insight or shoe repair technique, was endowed with higher value and thus remembered and practiced more deeply. Did inefficiency lead to stagnation, or did hardship filter out the trivial, allowing only truly important, or urgently needed information to circulate? The soft, grating sound of Pachomius grinding ink seems the background noise to this unresolved question. The letter's content is extremely brief. Just a few lines. But writing it took him a good part of the afternoon. Finally, he carefully rolls up the papyrus fragment and ties it with a thin hemp cord. He looks at you, as if thinking of something. You're also looking for John. If you're willing, and happen to meet a traveler heading towards Salt Mountain, perhaps you could help ask if there's someone who could deliver this letter to Brother Aga though. This is not a demand, just an opportunity. He hands you the small papyrus roll. It's light, but in your hand, it feels like it carries a specific expectation, not for heaven, but for the plain hope that a pair of sandals can walk a few more miles. Now, let's return to your sandal, this leather contraption barely encasing your feet, creaking. Outside Pachomius's dwelling, in the light of the slanting afternoon sun, you finally have a chance to examine it closely, not as an annoying problem, but as a historical artifact. You take it off, place it on a flat rock. It looks so humble, so shabby, but in the 4th century Egyptian desert, its status is no less than any scripture you might own in the future. It's your mobile foundation, the only buffer between you and this merciless earth. First, the sole. It's not a single thick piece of leather, but several layers of thinner leather, likely goat or cowhide, stacked together. These layers aren't glued, glue would fail in the desert heat, but are pegged together with rows of small, neat wooden nails, perhaps from acacia thorns or palm wood. These nails form a simple geometric pattern, both for fixing and inadvertently dispersing pressure. The sole's edge is roughly cut, without the refined binding of modern shoes, so grit easily invades from the side as you walk. Mainstream history tells us this multi-layer pegged sole, a variant of the Carbatina style, was very common in the late Roman Near East and North Africa, a common choice for commoners and soldiers. It balanced durability, accessibility of materials, and some shock absorption. Archaeologists have found countless such sole fragments in Egyptian trash heaps, tombs, and dry caves, like temporal fossils speaking of the daily act of walking. Then the upper. Yours is a simpler style. The main load-bearing strap is a wide leather band that passes between the big and second toe, then splits into two strands, fixed to either side of the sole, forming a V-shape over your instep. There might be one or two auxiliary ankle straps for stability. All attachment points, precisely where you clumsily repaired, are sewn to the sole with strong fiber, animal sinew, palm leaf fiber or tanned gut. The leather itself is tanned, but likely with primitive vegetable or smoke tanning, its color a natural tan with stains and sweat marks from use. You can imagine its maker, in a dim workshop, with a simple crescent-shaped leather knife, an awl, a mallet, and a bone needle, repeating operations unchanged for millennia. An extremely niche, somewhat bizarrely poetic fact, on sandals found at some desert sites, trace amounts of manure have been detected. This isn't due to poor hygiene, though that's possible, but possibly intentional. Some scholars believe animal dung, especially from camels or cattle, might have been used as a primitive leather softener or filler. The enzymes and ammonia could help make leather more pliable. Imagine the sandals on your feet, seeking a holy path, their making perhaps beginning with a carefully selected pile of dried dung. Enough to instantly ground any romantic notion, literally. Pachomius's earlier mention of fig milk points to another technical corner. The white latex from a cut fig tree contains proteases that can break down proteins. In theory, it might have been used to treat leather surfaces, removing residual hair and grease, perhaps even forming a thin protective film. But was it truly better than traditional methods? Did it make leather brittle? This relied entirely on word-of-mouth experience, easily distorted or mythologized in transmission. Perhaps Brother Agatho's reply will contain a first-hand report on this. You observe the crude repair on your sandal. The sinew stitching has shrunk upon drying, pulling the leather tighter, but also making the repair more prominent and uneven. This raises a point historians still gently debate. For the Desert Fathers, were these rough, visible repairs, systrophy, merely born of necessity and function, or did they gradually acquire an aesthetic, even spiritual value? One view holds that rough, visible mending was itself a sign of humility and rejection of vanity, an external extension of bodily asceticism. Every patch a small victory against material perfection. A more pragmatic view argues they didn't think that deeply. Something broke, they fixed it in the most direct way possible with what was at hand, then continued praying and working. Aesthetics weren't in their lexicon. Repair was to extend use, not express theology. From your crooked stitches, you personally currently lean strongly towards the latter theory. The sunset dyes the dunes gold and red. You put the sandal back on, holding the letter that feels light yet heavy. Pachomius's words echo, find silent John. You know tomorrow you'll go deeper into the valley, not just seeking more expert help for your own sandals, but also to deliver this inquiry about leather hardening techniques on the first leg of its journey. You look at the papyrus roll in your hand. It encapsulates a question so specific it's almost laughable, yet it represents an eternal human effort, in extreme environments, to overcome material limitations through collaboration and knowledge sharing, even if that effort is as slow as the flow of desert sand. The next morning, under the simple eaves outside Pachomius's dwelling, you begin your first clerical workday in the desert. The air is crisp, the sun not yet fierce, good for detailed work. What's laid out before you is no longer abstract spiritual pursuit, but a series of laughably concrete material problems. How to turn the question in your mind about sandals into a few lines of portable, interpretable symbols on papyrus. Pachomius generously allows you to use some of his basic materials, quietly weaving a basket nearby, occasionally glancing over as if overseeing a minor sacrament. First, the paper. What you hold isn't modern smooth paper, but a yellowish, coarse, ragged-edged papyrus fragment. It's recycled, likely from the blank margin of a damaged document or a discarded minor scripture scroll. Mainstream history tells us papyrus making was a signature Egyptian technology. Take sedge stems from the Nile banks, strip the outer bark, cut the pith into thin strips, lay them crosswise, press with weight, their natural sap bonds them together, and after drying and polishing it's done. But in the desert interior, fresh papyrus is a luxury. Monks had limited access, perhaps through trade with passing caravans, or occasional donations from wealthy patrons to a famous hermit. Thus, every inch of surface must be used frugally. The fragment in your hand is only large enough for 10 to 15 concise lines. You must be exceedingly succinct. Next, the ink. Pachomius has a tiny ceramic dish with dried carbon particles from yesterday's grinding. You need to reactivate it. He points to a small jar of liquid, not water, but darker, slightly viscous. Grape vinegar, he explains simply. Better than water for fixing color, less prone to smudging. You drip a few drops onto the carbon powder and begin patiently grinding with a smooth pebble. The process is slow, repetitive, making a soft grating sound. The carbon gradually mixes with the vinegar into a thick black paste. This is basic carbon ink, atramentum. It's black from soot or charcoal. For more durable, fiber-penetrating ink, iron gall ink made from iron salts and tannic acid, often from oak galls, was used, but that process is more complex and acidic, potentially corroding fragile papyrus. For a Sandal inquiry, carbon ink suffices. The grinding motion itself has a hypnotic rhythm, settling your scattered thoughts, focusing you on the simple task at hand, turning black powder into writable fluid. Then the pen. You find no quill. Pachomius hands you a reed stock. This is an older, more Eastern writing tool. You sharpen one end with a small knife, then gently bite to split the fibers, creating a fine tip similar to a brush, a crude form of calamus. You dip it in ink, test it on a pottery shard. The tip is a bit hard, scratching on the rough surface, the line broken. You need a smoother surface. A very niche, almost comical fact, to save precious papyrus, people often practiced or drafted on reusable writing tablets before the final act. These could be wax-coated wooden tablets, for stylus etching, but a more common, cheaper option was the ostracon pottery shard. Egypt's dry climate has preserved tens of thousands of ostraca with draft letters, accounts, student exercises, even poems. Archaeologists have found ostraca with crude sandal sketches and dimensions, likely an ancient cobbler's or customer's design draft or repair memo. Your scribbling on the shard now unintentionally replicates millennia of the most common writing practice. You begin composing the wording. This isn't literary creation, but technical specification. Pachomius's template is clear: greeting, mutual acquaintance update, core question. Your specific challenge is describing your sandals wear. You can't write "my soul is wearing thin," too vague. You need precision. Write sandal from the main strap between toes back 3 finger widths. The leather joining sole to upper is worn by grit to less than half its original thickness, but stitching remains firm. This is even wear, not tear. You try to visualize an accurate description, forcing you to observe the broken sandal with unprecedented detail. Writing, at this moment, becomes a tool for enhanced observation. Historians still debate whether this forced brevity and pragmatic style, born of material constraints, expensive paper/ink, difficult delivery, in turn shaped the aphoristic, pointed literary quality of early Desert Fathers literature, like the sayings of the Desert Fathers. Did material scarcity breed spiritual conciseness? Or was it merely a practical compromise, unrelated to literary style? As you chew the reed tip, racking your brain to make the sole as thin both accurate and economical, you likely feel any literary style is distant and luxurious. You just want to be clear. Finally, you deem the ink's consistency right, the tip somewhat tamed, your mental draft ready. You flatten the precious papyrus fragment on a stone slab, take a deep breath, and make the first stroke. The reed tip rubs against the papyrus's rough surface with a soft susurrus. The carbon ink bleeds slightly into the fibers, creating slightly feathered strokes. You write slowly, firmly, knowing there's no chance for correction. Every letter must be legible, lest the distant brother Agatho misunderstand, sending his precious reply astray. You write the greeting, mention brother Elijah, whom Pachomius told you about, though you've never met him, and then reach the core, the inquiry about leather wear and fig milk. When the last symbol is complete, you gently blow on the surface, waiting for the ink to dry. The sunlight has moved, illuminating the few lines of crooked but neat script. They lie quietly on the yellowed papyrus, waiting to be rolled, tied, and cast into the desert's vast, unpredictable postal system. This letter itself, from finding materials to grinding ink, making the pen, to writing, consumed nearly 2 hours. The time and labor condensed in it far exceed the value of the sandals it inquires about. But in an environment where time seems infinite and materials are counted to the last grain, this uneconomical investment precisely weaves the fabric of life's meaning. You roll the letter, tie it with thin cord, and place it alongside Pachomius's. They are now a pair, about to embark on their respective parallel journeys of waiting. Now let's shift our gaze away from you for a moment, over those undulating dunes and dry riverbeds, to a valley further west, closer to the shimmering white salt flats. Time passes like a desert shadow, slow and certain. Perhaps a month after you wrote your letter, maybe two. In the shade of a steep cliff, there is an entrance to a cave more Janlol than Pachomius's dwelling, almost merging with the rock. Here lives Agatho, another protagonist in our story. His reputation among nearby monks spreads not for fiery sermons, but for his nearly silent hands-on understanding of leather, rope, and various natural materials. It's evening. Agatho has just finished his long afternoon prayer, sitting on a smooth rock at the cave entrance, using the last light to smooth a goatskin for a new waterskin with a pumice stone. His movements are slow, repetitive, with a hypnotic rhythm. His sandals, quite well maintained, soles thin but even, key joints with small tight patches, are casually discarded nearby. He looks leaner than Pachomius, his gaze calmer, as if external speech has been internalized into meticulous observation of the material world. Mainstream history tells us hermits like Agatho represent another aspect of desert spirituality, not just battling inner demons, but engaging in a daily, pragmatic dialogue with the limitations of the material world. Through handling leather, weaving baskets, tending a small garden, they saw labor, ponos itself as continuous prayer, a meditation involving the body. Footsteps approach, not an animal's, but human, slightly weary. A dusty traveler appears on the path, likely a messenger or pilgrim moving between the desert's edge and more inland monastic points. These people are the desert's information capillaries, sparse but vital. The traveler greets Agatho breathlessly, takes out a small bundle containing a few pieces of hardtack as a gift, and 2 small papyrus rolls tied together with hemp cord. From the east, the traveler says simply, from Brother Pachomius, and a new face entrusted. The traveler drinks some water, rests briefly, and continues. Agatho takes the 2 letters, not opening them immediately. First, he holds them up to the fading light, examining the papyrus's appearance and the tying knot, as if reading a letter beyond the letter, assessing its journey and condition. Then he goes inside, by the weak flame of a clay oil lamp, carefully unties the cord. He reads Pachomius's letter first. Familiar greeting format, brief update on a mutual acquaintance. Reading about leatherware and fig milk, his calm face shows no change, only his gaze becomes more focused. He sets this one aside, picks up your letter, the one from the new face, with slightly unpracticed handwriting. He reads slowly, and when you describe the wear location and pattern, he unconsciously moves his own toes, as if simulating the stress point. Your question is more basic, about emergency stitching of a tear and preventing further splitting, a different technical level from Pachomius's concern with preventive hardening. A very niche, almost endearing fact, in surviving letters or inventories related to desert fathers, scholars have found needle rafis, often listed as important property, sometimes even alongside holy books. They usually weren't metal needles, too expensive, but carefully ground hard plant thorns, like date palm or acacia, or simply sturdy fish bones. Having a good needle was key to maintaining basic dignity of life. Agatho's needles are stuck in a piece of cork at his cave entrance, arranged in a row by thickness and purpose, like a miniature tool array. Finished reading, Agatho doesn't immediately write a reply. He carefully places the 2 small papyrus rolls in a dry stone niche, then resumes his unfinished leather smoothing. But his rhythm seems subtly altered, slower, more thoughtful. He is retrieving from his memory bank the toughness of leather from different parts, the efficacy of various natural adhesives or hardeners, the durability of stitching through dry-wet cycles. He recalls in his youth seeing an old monk apply a paste of beeswax mixed with fine clay to sole edges, said to resist grit effectively. Vaguely remembers someone mentioning camel urine's peculiar use in certain leather treatments. He's skeptical. As for fig milk, he has experimented himself. Unstable results, can make leather locally hard and brittle, perhaps only suitable for very specific parts and extremely thin application. Historians still debate what role knowledge holders like Agatho played in desert monastic communities. Were they respected technical elders, whose opinions held near authority in practical matters? Or was their knowledge seen as a worldly skill, unrelated to core spirituality, even potentially distracting? only shared privately? From Agatho's careful regard upon receiving the letters, the former seems closer to truth. On survival's edge, problem solvers radiate a quiet, reliable light. Yet other scholars point out many famous fathers in the sayings, whose wisdom sayings are widely circulated, rarely mention any specific life skills. Perhaps in the desert's value spectrum, skills for handling the soul were ultimately considered higher than those for handling leather. Night fully envelopes the valley. Agatho blows out the lamp. In absolute darkness, he doesn't lie down but assumes his habitual posture for nighttime meditation. But tonight, circling in his mind alongside scripture and prayers might be leather grain direction, the pH of fig milk, and how to distill complex experience into the simplest, clearest language for the two distant brothers, one familiar, one unknown, to understand and safely practice. His reply will be not just courtesy, but a responsibility, to the trust that crossed the desert to reach him. He will begin composing his response at first light tomorrow. Agatho wakes before the morning star fades. Not from strict discipline, but habit. In the desert, the brief morning cool is prime time for work, whether the work of prayer or of leather. Today his work is clear: prepare substantive content for the reply, and this content must be based on materials he will now go collect and verify. He drinks a few sips of water, rereads your letter and Pachomius's once more, then carefully tucks them into his robe. He needs to let the questions settle as he walks and observes, while gathering materials. He walks barefoot from the cave. To conserve sandal wear, many monks went barefoot on familiar, relatively safe short paths, carrying a rough fiber bag, heading deeper into the valley. His steps are light and precise, avoiding sharp stones and thorny plants. Dawn light paints everything pale gold. The air holds chill and dust. Agatho's eyes scan the ground, rock crevices, shrub branches like a scanner. He's not just walking, he's conducting a fine dialogue with the environment, a continuous assessment of what's usable. Mainstream history tells us the Desert Fathers held a highly contradictory attitude towards the material world. On one hand, they advocated extreme simplicity, seeing possessions as burdens to the soul. The famous Father Macarius even said, "If you own something, it owns you." On the other, their survival depended entirely on a deep, understanding utilization of their surroundings' material properties. This understanding wasn't possessive, but dialogic, respectful. Every suitable stone, every tough fiber, every usable sap was seen as a part of God's creation to cooperate with, not conquer. They were practicing sustainable living in an extreme context, though their motivation was spiritual, not environmental. Agatho first stops in the shade of a rock crevice. Several clumps of plants with slender gray-green leaves grow there. This is camel thorn, or similar drought-tolerant shrubs. He carefully breaks off some older branches, avoiding new shoots. The inner bark of such shrubs is rich in tough fibers. After beating and soaking, they can be separated to make stitching cord more resistant to moisture and more flexible than palm fiber. He peels a small section, rubs it between his fingers, feeling the fiber's strength and length, nods, and puts it in the bag. This is a niche bit of knowledge known only to a few archaeobotanists and reconstruction craftsmen. Analysis of rope or fabric fragments from some early monastic sites reveals plant fibers from non-local common crops, likely from these carefully selected wild drought-resistant shrubs, proving the monks' detailed exploration and specialized use of local plant resources. Next, he goes to a slightly lower, vaguely damp area. A few twisted acacia trees grow here. Agatho's target isn't wood, but the dark resin lumps ningje on the trunks. He carefully scrapes off some with a stone flake. This resin softens and becomes sticky when heated, hard and brittle when cool. It can serve as a temporary adhesive, filling small leather cracks, or dabbed on knots to prevent loosening. But it's unstable, temperature sensitive. He collects it, perhaps to note its limitations in the reply. Not every natural, findable thing is a good answer. Then the crucial part, verifying Pachomius's mentioned fig milk. Agatho knows of a small oasis ruin nearby with a few wild, scrawny fig trees. He goes to a tree, makes a cut on a branch with a small knife. Almost immediately, milky sap oozes out, thick, with a pungent vegetal smell. He catches a few drops on a clean stone flake, observes its viscosity and color. He sets the flake aside to dry naturally. Later, he'll scrape off the dried film, mix it with a bit of sand, and test its hardening effect on a scrap of leather. This process itself is a primitive, experience-based experimental science. Historians still gently debate, did the Desert Fathers' deep knowledge and use of natural materials stem from their previous secular training? Many were farmers, soldiers, craftsmen before becoming hermits, or was it reaccumulated through pure trial and error and observation in the desert? If the former, then withdrawal from the world didn't completely sever the past but repurposed past skills. If the latter, it better showcases the astonishing elasticity of human adaptability. Judging from Agatho's Sulan and precise gathering movements, the answer might be both. He entered the desert with some prior knowledge, refined, verified, and revised through survival's harsh sieve, eventually forming a highly localized, personalized material philosophy. Agatho's bag gradually gains weight. Besides plant materials, he picks up a few pieces of fine sandstone of different colors and textures for natural abrasives. He even notices peculiar beetle tracks in the sand, which might indicate a source of animal fat suitable for softening leather. Carrion, below. Every choice is a tiny judgment. Is this usable? How effective? Any side effects? Is there a simpler or more lasting alternative? The sun climbs, heat gathering. Agatho returns to his cave. He sorts the collected materials, then sits at the entrance, taking a scrap of leather and your letter. He simulates the wear location you described, trying reinforcement stitching with camel thorn fiber, considering which stitch pattern best disperses stress. He tests acacia resin as a temporary reinforcement point. For each test, he silently notes process and outcome. These materials themselves are lifeless, but in Agatho's thought and experimentation, they seem awakened to potential. His reply will be not just a few suggestions, but a concise report based on evidence, on how to work with these silent collaborators. Repairing a sandal at this level becomes a micro-creative act, not creation from nothing, but guiding existing, overlooked matter back to order and function. This work, in the desert silence, holds its own deep satisfaction.